Hi, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Dimos Georgokitsos. You might know me from the Airlock Academy or from previous webinars like the one yesterday. And with me is Dr. Martin Burkhardt, who is the product manager of the Airlock Microgateway and the Airlock Gateway. We are going to present you the most important changes with it, with the Microgateway 2.0. And as always, you have the opportunity to ask questions. So there is a question tool where you can ask a question if you don't want the others to see the question, because there might be some internal information. You can change to a private mode where you can just ask us and no one else will see those questions. So the Airlock Microgateway 2.0 hasn't been released yet. We're waiting for a new version of libcurl, which was announced these days, and we thought it's better to wait for that new version instead of having to patch everything as soon as we released our own software. So Airlock Microgateway and Airlock Gateway are waiting for this libcurl. And therefore both products will be released as soon as we get the new version and as soon as we finish testing, of course. The other information, which is always important to remember, is that the Airlock Microgateway uses the same filter engine like the Airlock Gateway. So if you have some rules set up there, you can take those setups from the Airlock Gateway and move to the Airlock Microgateway without a problem, or the other way around. And this is also a reason why we release those products at the same time. Biggest change on the Airlock Microgateway is that we use now Kubernetes init containers. The goal was to reduce the resources for the running or the runtime image. And what it does is we have actually two containers. One is the config builder, the init container, which takes the DSL, processes them, and then creates the running container. And then the running container does the whole work, which you are expecting from the Airlock Microgateway. And the good thing about this is that it needs much less resources than the old configuration where we just had one container with everything inside it, and therefore this should be very good for you in the long time while you're running all those processes. You don't need as much as resources as you would with the Airlock Microgateway 1.0. Another change is the support for deny rule settings specific to groups. So what we did is every group has a unique group key. You can see that in the documentation. And when you want to change something on a whole group, you can reference the group key and therefore don't have to reference every deny rule for itself. There's also changes with the allow rules. And there's another big change in the DSL where we allow now the backend group to be part of the mapping. Up to now, it was only possible to have a virtual host mapping and then a backend group or a backend. And now we moved this under the mappings, which means every mapping can have its own backend group, which means you could have theoretically multiple backend groups within one configuration if you want to do this. One of the reasons we did this is because we wanted to enable multiple ways to use IAM with the Microgateway, and not just one specific way. So you can decide yourself which one you want to go of those ways. So there is actually a single Microgateway way, which looks more like the classic gateway, or you can have separate Microgateways. Then you have to use Redis to share the session information between the Microgateways, or you can have separate Microgateways using a JOTI, where the authentication information is passed from the different arrays through a JOTI, which goes through the client back to the Microgateway. So if you have a single Microgateway, the pro is you have one central SSO state, so you have one Microgateway which knows everything, less containers required, complete configuration in a single file, if you want that. Of course, the drawback is there is no deployment separation between the Airlock IAM and the services, or the service if you have one service. So this is not the typical way to go with microservices, but we didn't want to forbid this to you, so it's possible to do it. If you want to do it, we don't want to be the ones holding you up. The other way, with the separate microgateways, the pros: deployment separation between Airlock IAM and the services, which was the con before. It's actually best practice with microservice architectures. The cons is that the SSO state must be synchronized between the microgateways, and of course more containers required. Let's have a look how those solutions would look like. So in a single container approach, you would have multiple mappings and multiple backend groups behind the Airlock Microgateway. The Airlock Microgateway, of course, if for the session data needs a Redis database, a Redis container or a database there, which is running and holding the state of the sessions. And you see all the authentication calls would go through the same microgateway. All the protected services are behind the same microgateway, which, as I said, means as soon as one of the services or the Airlock IAM has to update, you have to redeploy this microgateway, and the other services are not connected or have a small interrupt too. The other way, which is more a typical microservices like, is that you have for every service one microgateway running in front of it. In front there's an ingress controller, of course, putting out the request to the according microgateway. You have one mapping per microgateway, you have one service per microgateway, but all the microgateways are connected to the Redis and do the session sharing there. So if someone is authenticated by the IAM, these services will know that the user is authenticated through the Redis database, and then would allow the access to the according service in the background. The last one, and I would say even more typical microservice-like, is you have multiple lines like before. Every service has its own microgateway. So every path will be on a different microgateway, will be on a different service. You still have an IAM creating or checking the authentication, but instead of sharing the information through the Redis, you have JOTIs, which contain the authentication information and the access information. So except the JOTI, you have a complete independence of all those services. There is no Redis needed. You can run theoretically everything sessionless, and you just have, every time you don't have an authentication, the call will be redirected to the authentication, or of course your service could call it from itself without having to be redirected to the authentication. Now, in order to show you how you could set up those things, we decided to create a MiniCube example, which means that you have on GitHub /ergon/Airlock MiniCube example, you have a full configuration for a MiniCube where you have multiple services protected to the Airlock Microgateway and authentication. And we had a first version of it, and we're now preparing the second version of it. As soon as it's released, it will be, of course, on the main path. If you want to go back to the first version, you can use tags. Of course, they're still there, but of course, the newest version is always on the main path. And how it looks like is that we set up a small scenario where you have multiple services, or actually you protect just one service in this case, but you have multiple services, setting up a scenario how you can work with the Airlock Microgateway and how you can have an oversight over the whole thing. So what we did is you have the echo server in the middle, just to have a service. Then you have on the left side the Airlock IAM, including a database to hold the session info, the user information, of course. And on the right side, you have Kibana, which points to Elasticsearch, which is fed by the FluentD, which goes through the warlock containers files and gets all the logs from the according services and puts them, of course, into the Elasticsearch. Okay, and the setup is the middle one I explained before. So you will have a session database with all the session information. All the microgateways know that there is a session database, so they are session aware. And of course, then you can try it out. You can call the Echo server. You would have to authenticate. You see all the information will be in the description. And after the authentication, the access is granted. And then you can check the logs on the Kibana presented by the third microgateway or protected by the third microgateway. So this is a small setup where you can reconstruct or see how we would construct everything, and you can draw your own conclusions out of it. What's not included here, but what we also added to the microgateway is a metrics interface, which allows Prometheus to access the information of this microgateway or of the microgateways, and then display according graphics to that. So you can see how the Airlock workload looks like, how many concurrent requests you have, if there were blocked or rejected requests, request processing times are part of it, concurrent authenticated sessions, throughput rates, which is important for licensing, of course. Yeah, things like this. So when you set up a microgateway, this metrics interface is included, and you just can link your Prometheus to that interface, and then the data will be shown there. As usual, we updated the online help. So if you go to docs.airlock.com, right now there's still the release version 1 there. As soon as we deploy or release, of course, the version 2, the whole thing will be updated. I've got a preview version of this online help. One of very important things is that the release notes are there, including the changelog down here, including the main new features, including the based Airlock Gateway version. So you know the Microgateway 2.0 is based on the Airlock Gateway version 7.6, and the breaking changes. So the init containers I mentioned before, that health endpoints now use port 9090. DSL syntax attributes we changed. So the backend session where you can have multiple objects in there. So this is why I talked about backend groups. And the backend section, which has now moved to the apps. So it's behind the mappings, how we call it. And therefore you can have multiple backend groups inside the microgateway. And therefore you can have this different IAM solutions I was talking about. The section deny rules has been renamed to deny rule groups, and the mappings entry path has been moved. And there is also one change which was introduced yesterday on the Airlock Gateway webinar, that the trailing slashes are not enforced anymore, which is a good thing, because up to now the trailing slashes were enforced when you had REST calls to REST endpoints. You would have to change the mapping accordingly, and now you can point your mapping, you can point your app directly to a specific REST endpoint if you want. Okay, so as soon as the Airlock IAM will be released, you will find the online help here on docs.airlock.com. You don't need any authentication to access it. It's completely open. And if you're interested in the Microgateway and want to have a better look at it, we're planning a course which is not part of the typical Airlock certification, so you don't have to be a certified Airlock engineer to be able to join that course. But on the 7th of July is the first course. We will have a Microgateway course which is thought or prepared for people who already know about Kubernetes. So we don't want to explain how containers work. We want to explain how the Microgateway works. So we're planning this course on the 7th of July. It will be online on the Academy page, airlock.com/academy. I think probably today or tomorrow, or at least as soon as the Microgateway 2.0 will be released. So you're welcome to join if you want on the 7th of July. Of course, there are the other courses as usual, and there are the Guru courses. So if you're already certified and you're interested in OAuth 2.0 and OpenID Connect, so those are IAM topics, of course, or the new flows, so the Login Up REST UI and API, then you can join one of those Guru courses. But in this specific case, I would point out the Microgateway course, which we are preparing actually right now in the background. I will continue to do my work there as soon as I finish with this webinar. If you have any colleague who missed out today, or if you want to rewatch something, or if you want to have a look at the slides, I will put the slides online probably by the afternoon. And you can find them on Texon Ergon.ch/webinars. You need a Texon account to join there, of course. And you can have a look at the slides, and as soon as the recording has been converted and put online, I will also link the recording of this webinar so you can have a look at it there. That's it from our side. If you want to ask something, don't hesitate. There's the question tools where you can ask questions. We will be online for a few minutes, even though the presentation will stop, so we can answer your questions. Anyways, whatever you do, enjoy your day. See you next time.